Good evening, everyone. I am Gwydion Sullivan, Penn Faulkner's Executive Director, and I am so excited for tonight's conversation. And most of you probably or maybe don't know Penn Faulkner, or maybe you do, but in case some of you don't, we are a national literary organization that's best known for giving out the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction, the Penn Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story, and the Penn Hemingway Award for Debut Novel. But we also run a variety of education programs that bring free books and visiting authors and writing instruction into underserved classrooms in Washington, D.C., all at no cost to the schools or to the students in order to inspire the next generation of readers and writers. And of course, we hold public literary programs just like this one. Now, our programs are all about conversation, and the last few minutes of tonight's event are for your questions. So please use the Q&A box at any time during the conversation you're about to hear if you want to join in on that dialogue. Now, tonight we are very incredibly lucky to be joined by Mahreen Sohail, the author of this year's Penn Faulkner Award-winning short story collection, Small Scale Sinners, which I have been raving about for months now to anyone who will listen. Mahreen, who was born in Islamabad, Pakistan, has an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College, where she was a Fulbright scholar, and she's also been a writing fellow at a public space in New York and a Charles Pick Fellow at the University of East Anglia. Now, leading the conversation tonight will be Samantha Hunt, one of this year's Penn Faulkner Award judges, and I am very proud to note, the author of her own story collection called The Dark Dark, which itself was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award in 2018. Samantha is a Guggenheim Fellow whose books have been translated into 13 languages, and I hope you'll get to know her work as well. Her latest is called The Unwritten Book, and it's a great place to start. And this should be an outstanding conversation, so let's dive in. Maureen and Samantha, I want to invite you both to turn on your cameras and unmute your mics and take it away from here.
Thanks, Gwydion. Thanks so much. Um, I just want to start by congratulating you, Maureen. I mean, what a wonderful book, and thank you for bringing it to us all. I wonder if you might start us off just by reading a brief section so that folks listening can get a sense for how gorgeous this book is.
Sure. Thank you so much, Samantha. I'm so excited to be here. And I was so excited when I'd heard that I had won the award. So I'm going to read a story called The Man Who Flew, the first page of that. This wasn't published before it was in the book. And yeah, I'll just read the first page. The man squatting in the unfinished house is learning how to fly. Every morning for the past few months, I've seen him scavenging around our neighborhood for discarded pajamas, shirts, bed sheets, linen, and plastic bags. He pokes at things with a large stick, overturns them, and then reaches to pick them up gently, holding them between his thumb and forefinger as if he is one of those people who examines rare dead birds for a living. He carries the things up to the unfinished house. It is really just a skeleton of a house, no doors, windows, paint. I watch this man closely because our neighbor believes he is a spy. The neighbor's house is next to the unfinished house, and ours is opposite both. Why else would he need to collect all that junk, she asks when she comes over to drink tea with my mother. It's a front for all the spying he's doing for our country's intelligence services. The neighbor has to enunciate clearly and come right up to my mother's face to make herself heard. Both women are in their late 70s, almost double my age. Once they must have attracted attention. Now their conversation fritters about in the air. The neighbor thinks our lives deserve to be spied upon. At times, I find myself believing her stories. After all, the man does spy on me, especially when in the middle of the afternoon I lie back on my bed and masturbate. He sits on the third floor of the unfinished house and stares right at me as the sun shines down on us both. Sometimes he is also naked, but he never touches himself while he watches me. His arms stay by his side. He might be a spy, but he is an honorable spy. I'll end there.
Thank you so much. And oh, I'm so glad you chose that one to read too. That's one of my favorites. And I think that it's one of my favorites because it does this wonderful thing that you're working in all 12 of the stories where in some of them you approach the supernatural. In some of them we're fully within the supernatural, and in some of them the supernatural is nowhere to be seen. We're really in the day-to-day world. And I love The Man Who Could Fly because that's one of those ones that's somewhere in between. And so I wonder, Maureen, if you could just talk a little bit about um, your relationship to the supernatural as a writer, how you think about incorporating it or not incorporating it, and which stories kind of call out to that.
I think hadn't really, I don't really think about it much when I'm writing about incorporating. Actually, all of the stories to me are very real and don't, did not think of them actually as supernatural stories. Um, but sometimes I feel like maybe magic can happen. Actually, Samantha, I was reading your book, The Dark Dark, and there's one in which a dog comes back to life. And I remember, and I know that can't happen, but also it could happen, and that's part of life, right? Like, can we stretch the limits of possibility, and how far can we stretch them? So maybe that's what I was interested in when I was writing the stories.
I love it that you said that too. I was just talking to a group of students yesterday about this idea, and I really do. I often resist the idea of magic or the supernatural because I just think, well, the world is just more wonderful, maybe, or more, And so to hear you say that you don't think that any of these stories is supernatural, that actually makes me feel a lot of strength. I love that. Um, thanks. So maybe just I'm curious how this collection got started for you. Did you find that the stories were connected? I mean, in many ways, I do feel like we're reading about one large family, but I might be putting that on myself. And so can you speak to us about how this collection got started and how you created these?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't conceive of it as a collection when I started them. I was writing a novel actually. So I did my MFA in the US and I moved back to Pakistan for several years. To my knowledge, I was there indefinitely, and I thought, oh, I have to keep writing, otherwise I'll lose it. Um, and I thought, if I want to sell something, it's going to be a novel. So I started work on this novel, and it was a very serious novel, and I kept at it for years. And on the side, I was writing all these stories, just as a form of play and kind of dealing with, the scenes that you think about on a day-to-day basis, and you want to explore them on the page. And some of them got published, and some of them just lay around. And the novel eventually went out to publishers and did not get picked up.
Mhm.
And it had been 7, 8 years of writing at that point, and I was so sad. And I was like, I gotta have a book. So
Yeah.
I looked at and I was like, well, let me look at the rest of the writing. And I suddenly realized I had all these stories
Yeah.
and I put them side by side. And it was so interesting because I had been writing about I had been interested in the same things for over 6 to 7 years. Families, do women, how do they have power or agency? And so it became clear to me that it was a collection. And then the collection went out and it became my first book. So that's how the collection sort of, and I had to do some reordering, and my editor, Bridget Hughes, was great. She did a
Mhm.
great, she really helped. But it was kind of surprising to see them and to see I'd done all this work and just not realized it, because I was so focused on this other thing that was the main thing.
That's such an interesting idea to me because I too write short stories as a place to go when I'm not writing the novel, like when I can't write the novel, or I turn to short stories as a place to put the things that don't fit into the novel. And the honest truth is that I love writing short stories. I love writing short stories more than I like writing novels. And yet, I have more novels than I have short stories. And so I think about that. And one thing that I noticed as I was reading reviews and just pieces, people thinking about small scale sinners, is that a lot of folks grab onto the idea of morality in the title, the question of sinners, and very few people were grabbing onto the idea of the small scaleness. And to me, one thing that made this book so powerful is in its smallness, because it reminds me that there is power in what is tiny. There is power in the short story, first of all. There is power in the home. There is power in these little girls who are like demons, basically, in many of the stories. There's power in family, and so these small spaces, I really celebrate in your work, and I'm curious if you have thoughts about that question of scale, that question of um, the smaller thing, especially now hearing that this came out of a novel that didn't really work.
Yeah, I mean, the the stories are small. They did, I have a story in there called Hair, and in it, there's a woman who kind of lives, gets married, sort of dies. That's it. I mean, a lot else happens, but that's the trajectory of her life. And I remember an editor asking me the question, this is great, like it's fine, but are you sure this is all you want this woman's life to be? And I remember thinking, actually, that's a pretty big lie.
Yeah.
A lot happens in that life, like
Mhm.
a woman who lives, gets married, has kids, and dies. There's a lot contained in that. So, the scale is relative.
Yeah. Yeah. I part of it came out of just thinking about, I guess, the pandemic, when I was thinking about like, here's the tiniest thing. It's so tiny, and yet it's immobilized our entire world, and I think
Yeah.
the small has an amazing power, and often things that I think get shunted aside for being small are some of the most powerful things. And so that was just such a prevalent theme for me as I was reading the work, about how powerful these tiny moments are that you create, these beautiful and strange moments that then, that just kind of overflow with power. And I mean, and part of that is your lyrical nature too, just these absolutely beautiful sentences, these beautiful moments. Um, I want to ask you now about, there's oftentimes in a country in this collection that remains unnamed, and it's not America. And so I'm curious about your choice to keep a location so generalized, and to have this otherness that is never labeled or named.
So the stories are set in Pakistan. And actually, I think the blurb by Garth Risk Hallberg says Pakistan. And when it was reviewed, you picked up on it correctly that I did not mention it. I deliberately kept the name out. I think there's one story where it mentions where someone's wearing a badge that says Pakistan is my mother. I think that's
That's
the
right. Yeah.
story that's sisters.
Hmm.
And I did conceive of all of the characters living there. But I realized that when I actually put a name or a city or uh, you know, a name to the place, I felt like I couldn't play with it anymore. Like I had to be true to it, and there was some kind of loyalty line that I was crossing. And I just felt like keeping things unnamed helped me be a little bit more like these women could be any women. Like I wasn't pigeonholing.
Mhm.
Pakistani women or any kind of women, actually. I think someone asked me a very strange question about that, where they were like, "Are you worried people will think Pakistani women are weird?" I was like, all women are weird. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think so. That's not what I'm worried about. But it comes across at the story. You know, I'm a Pakistani writer, I feel, or a Pakistani writer writing in English. So they're set in Pakistan. It's true. But keeping the name out initially allowed me the freedom to write whatever I wanted without feeling like I was crossing some boundaries or lines that I shouldn't be crossing.
Yeah. It had this really beautiful effect of making it both both kind of very local and very global too, to that extent that it could be. I mean, I read it as I mean, I knew that it was Pakistan. I knew that you were a Pakistani writer, but I read them as also that was a very intentional choice. And so it had this wonderful effect of making it feel like
Yeah,
in
I do.
anywhere. Mhm.
Yeah, I do feel like this could happen. This could happen anywhere. I love to talk. I don't know if this is the best place to talk about this, but you know, a lot of times people say, um, you know, like people are worried that, oh, you can't show Pakistani women as the too conservative. They're conservative. You know, there's like this, especially if you're perceiving it from a Western lens, it's like, oh, they're maybe oppressed or suppressed or something like that. Um, But sometimes I watch that show, Love is Blind. Do you ever watch that? The
No, but
US
I
version?
know it. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yes.
And I'm like, oh my God, people here, like conservatism is not like, it is a very Western like
Mhm.
phenomena. Sometimes I feel like everyone should watch Love is Blind for that.
I love that. That's good. And it relates to this next question that I want to ask you about, which is this idea of a space between. And so maybe this is the space between conservative America and conservative Pakistan. But um, you write in How to Raise American Children, you write, a girl is divided in two after she marries. Um, and then there's another beautiful line from the dog where you say, the key is to rest in the space between lives for a little while. And I feel like there's oftentimes you're asking your characters to bridge a distance. They're sometimes they're outsiders, they're removed, they're watchers, they're observers. You know, they're not the main action, it seems oftentimes. They're somebody who is watching. Um, and so I wonder if you could talk about that space in between, if that makes any sense. If what are those places in between and are you know, how do you go about creating them?
A tough question.
I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think I feel I don't know if everybody feels this, but I certainly felt this in your book, that characters feel trapped in their lives.
Mhm.
I mean, I love my life, but I also am often thinking, oh, there must be more. Like,
Mhm.
you know, there has to be more magic. Like, I grew up wanting like a little bit. And I think a lot of the characters are in this space. Some of them are very much stuck in their lives and can very obviously see there are more. Like the woman in The Man Who Flew is living with her mother and she needs to be somewhere else, basically, you know.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
she's this caretaker. And some of them are bound by duty, some of them are bound by, so there's very obvious reaches for them. But for others, I think there's an emotional reach that they're reaching for. The sisters who kidnapped the girl in a public space. You know, they are also trying to bridge the divide, but for me, maybe that divide is the bridge uh of grief over their mother being sick. You know, the whole of that story is the mother who is in the hospital.
Mhm.
Um, so oftentimes they're reacting to things. Yeah. I
I
it's
love that. I love thinking about that as the emotional bridge too. And it is like reaching from one character to another as part of it in
yeah,
some way, trying to understand each other. I mean, the in The Man Who Flew, that distance is so beautifully navigated that they are actually thinking about flying across,
Yeah.
in some way connecting with each other. And that beautiful bridge, that beautiful distance shows up on different scales in so many of the pieces, and it really is very touching each time it happens. I mean, especially in thinking about conversations between How to Raise American Children, the conversations between the mother who is um, back home in the motherland and the daughter who's decided to come to America. I love thinking about that distance, that sort of distance too. Um, I want to ask you about, so three of these stories are list stories, or what I think of as list stories. Does that make sense? That sisters, where we get these
Yeah.
kind of discrete, almost like bullet points on people in a development of character, and um, that form is really interesting to me. And I wonder if you might talk about your use of it and how you came to land on that.
Yeah. So a list of places my mother was old is quite literally a list. And that was, I conceived of it as a list. I wanted to jump quickly through time back and forth. And I think the list format allows you to do that. Like you don't need scenes or you don't need, and it basically, you one can be something and then the title does a lot of work,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
then number one can be one thing and number two can be something totally different. So you can
Mhm.
really subvert the story. And that was really fun to play with. And that story came together very quickly and I wrote it very quickly. Um, the other story, Sisters, was actually a traditional short story. So it had a beginning, middle, and end. It was about 5,000 words. But every time I read it, I was like, oh, this is not exciting. Like it was fine, but it wasn't exciting. But it felt to me like there were lines in there that I loved. And I was like, let me get rid of everything except those lines. And then I built the story back up from that and
Yeah.
tried to
Mhm.
conceive of a way that I could keep just those lines
Mm.
and only have some padding around them.
Mm.
And that really, I feel like that changed the story. That changed the story. That really helped. But and I took all those lines, I kind of remapped them on the floor. Like I cut it was a fun process working with that story.
Yeah. I love thinking about how you just said, I mean, that goes back to the idea of the bridging the distance too, that even just on a structural level with writing, that you have these leaps between description too. Yeah, as if the sections are reaching for each other, trying to make themselves whole in some way. That's
Yeah.
really a wonderful uh expansion of thinking about these bridges that happen in your work, and that kind of space between that you write about, that is without without being, oh, over here I'm American, over here I'm Pakistani, over here I'm a girl, over here
Yeah.
I'm a woman, and it is that space in between. um and so I want to ask you a question about the space in between girl and woman, because so many of these characters bring such a rich idea to both grown women and to girls. Um, I have to say, you make these girls that are so kind of wonderful and horrible, and they actually made me laugh in their brutality, like because it is unexpected. It's not what we expect a group of schoolgirls to act like. um, in both, the story where there's like torturing the goat, and in the Newlyweds, and then also in School Year, which is such a wonderful short story. It's the first story in the collection for folks who haven't read the collection yet. And it's written in the second person. And I wonder if you can talk about how that story came to be a little bit and tell us some of it, because it's such an extraordinary piece.
So I was on the Charles pick fellowship in the UK. They gave me 3 months. I mean, enough time has passed that I can say this now.
Mhm.
But I had gone to work on a book and I didn't do any work except write that story. That was the only piece I got out of that. It was a wonderful time. I made lifelong friends, but I was not very productive for some reason, except that was the only story that was in my head. And back then I was writing in the we voice, so in the second point of view. So the sisters story, not the sisters, basic training, which is the two
Oh,
sisters and the mother,
yes. Hmm.
and our school year were written quite close together because I was kind of obsessed. There's a kind of cadence to it. I was also enamored with Lori Moore
Hmm.
at the time, who does a lot in her short stories with that voice. And yeah, the voice just came naturally and it was easy. And I also thought with our school year, I think there's something interesting about like how the story changes because of who's telling it. Like we know what's happening because the sisters are telling us what's happening, but when they change the tune of the narrative, it sort of becomes muddier, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yes, yes.
So
Hmm.
towards the end, I feel like it's unclear whether they did do that act or they did because they're trying to convince themselves they did not. And I just wanted to see if I could convince me that they hadn't done it and they were fine, you know?
Oh,
Um, that
mm.
was a really fun story. That was my favorite story to write, I think.
Oh, good. I love that story, and it's partly because that it does go back and forth from belief to disbelief, and you can take your reader so quickly, from thinking one thing about all of the girls to another thing, and um, it's wonderful how full that feels that way. Um, it also made me start thinking about that movement from the we of the girls, where they're kind of a full voice, and in the way that sometimes that young women want to identify as a group rather than a singular, and that movement from being a plural we and being together at this boarding school, moving to or this private school, and then going to the me that appears in a lot of the other stories, and of the married woman who is a lot more singular and a lot more alone. And I hadn't really thought about that transition of moving from the third person plural to a third person singular as an act of growing up, or sloughing off our friends in some way, or I hope not,
Yeah.
but we have portraits of both um, sorts of females here in this book, and it makes such an incredible richness. Um, I know that we don't have too much time left, but I do want to I want to talk to you about your influences and folks who you love to read. That's something that you're reading now, art that you've been participating in that is outside the written word, anything that we can um, think about, and maybe for further reading, things that you love.
So I think last year I read all of last year or maybe end of last year I read all of Annie Ernaux. That was very it was it's I would really recommend reading a writer like from start to finish. I think it changes something in you. You can see their trajectory. One of the books that I love and I'm actually hoping to revisit this year is Sula by Toni Morrison about female
Mhm.
friendship.
Mhm.
Um, there's a book by Jerry Pinto called M and the Big Whom that I was reading. I love Amy Hempel's In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried. You know, some of the classics are classics for a reason.
Mhm.
Especially the opening line of that, I think, tell me things I won't mind forgetting, make it useless or skip it. Like, I think that's a beautiful opening line. I love all of Tilly Olsen's short stories. Um, I wish more people read them. This year, a lot of Pakistani writers came out with books. Duramna came out with a book called A Splintering, which is beautiful, and you read it in like a heartbeat, and it's strange, and it's kind of amazing what younger Pakistani writers are doing now. Another writer, Danielle Moinuddin, came out with a new book called This Is Where the Serpent Lives. That I also enjoyed that. I feel like it was more novellas than a whole novel. Yeah, so I've been reading.
Lots of good places. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. I okay, last question. And this is something that you might be like, no, none of your business, but um all right, what are you working on now? And I'm kind of like, don't, I mean, almost scared to ask you that because of what we were saying earlier about a novel and short story collections, but I would also love to read a novel written by you.
So I actually, this is easy to answer because
Okay.
I'm not writing right now. But I am thinking about a project. So it's just about getting up the courage to sort of put pen to paper because I feel like, starting is so hard.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so that's but right now I'm not writing anything.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have that to look forward to. Um, I'm going to transition now to where the Q&A is open and there's already some questions in there. And I think the way that we'll do this is I'll just read you the questions. These are coming from our audience members, though. Um, okay, let's see. Uh, I loved your book, Maureen, and also loved Yuri Aziz Aman's The Splintering. Do you have any advice for first-time Pakistani women writers, specifically on how to get short story collections published as their first debut?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know, Samantha, maybe you will agree with me on this, but I think the thing is just to keep writing.
Mhm.
Um, so I did get my agent through short stories. That was very helpful. I published in a public space, and a couple of agents reached out to me, and I know that's not usually how things happen, so I was very lucky, but I feel like, I mean, the practical advice is you just have to write and publish in literary magazines and get an agent, and then that's the way to get story collections published. I don't know. Do you have anything to add there, Samantha?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I would say is both you and I started our careers with small presses too, and small presses is, wow. I
Yeah,
they're oftentimes really where so much good work is happening. And so I would encourage folks to read from small presses and to see, if that's a place where you might belong as well. Yeah.
yeah, I agree with that.
All right, here's another one from the audience. It says, Maureen, how do you balance real life and writing life?
Oh my God, very badly. I don't enjoy it well when I'm working on a project or really excited by a project. I wake up at 5 and I work for an hour, or well, maybe I wake up at 6. It's a lie that I wake up at 5. I wake up at 6 and I work for half an hour, and that's about it. But I have a full-time job. I have toddler. It's very hard. I am not always very good. I do religiously read on my commute, so my reading life has not that is something I have not sacrificed. I used to drive to work, which was nice, but I had to let that go in order to read. So I do think you have to keep reading.
Yeah, keep reading. That's good advice. Yes. This is a question from Lisa Kirkman. I'm glad to hear how much you enjoy short stories. I'm at the beginning of my journey and have been writing short stories as a way to get attention for the novels I wrote. Is that still a legit process, or would you say if you want to write novels, then write those?
Yeah, I mean, I went down the route of writing a novel in order to get published, and it initially it did not work well for me. Let's see what happens. But I think you should write whatever you want to write. I think it is a myth that short story collect it's a harder market for short story collections. There's so many presses out there. Um, and yeah, I think you should write whatever you want to write, basically. Don't Yeah, but sometimes you have to get through the forced stuff, like you have to make yourself do work that you don't want to. Maybe you're writing a novel because you think a novel will sell, but I'm sure that even writing the novel is teaching you something.
Good, good,
Um,
good advice. Yes. Um, all right. Could you describe the process of revising your collection with your editor?
yeah, so Bridget was actually a phenomenal editor. I think she has a reputation as a phenomenal editor, so she was great. We went back and forth on the stories. Some of them had very minor edits, and some of them had more slightly bigger structural changes. Like the opening I read from The Man Who Flew, she didn't feel like it was believable, and where there are elements where I could tweak the stories. She had really great advice on all the endings of the stories as well, where sometimes she felt I was taking them too far, and she helped tweak them. We went back and forth about 2 to 3 times on the stories. Some of them had already been published in different literary magazines, so there wasn't a lot of work on them. But others she really, and some of them just needed line edits, which was also nice. And then after Bridget, it was the copy editor, I think Anne McPeak, and she was also amazing. I think she had a terrible time with me because I'm so bad with commas and em dashes, but yeah, she also really helped make the book better.
Great. All right. This says, Haunting Collection, Maureen. Can you say more about writing place in fiction? What gets your brain excited about it?
I don't know actually that place is the first thing that I'm excited about when I'm writing. That's the honest answer. I love reading places, especially places that are well drawn, but I don't believe it is my strength. And often my stories are more character driven, and I have to remember to be like, oh, I have to put in like some signifier of where they are.
Mm,
And that's how I do place. And usually I try and not make the signifiers too cliche.
mhm,
Uh, so, if it's box, what would be a cliche? I'm trying to think of. Yeah, it's hard to come up with something right now, but not have it was summer and they were eating mangoes at the table, that to signify that we are in a Pakistani summer. Maybe that's not the
mhm,
first thing I would reach for. I would have to then look somewhere else and be like, what would be something that would be a little destabilizing, um, but still kind of give the impression of where these people are.
mm. This question is a good follow-up, and it's coming from a public space. Um, it says, I loved the question about the where in small scale sinners. Can you talk about the when?
The where,
The where as the place, but can you talk about the when?
the when in small scale sinners. So you'll have to explain this question to me a little bit more. I'm having
I mean,
trouble with it.
the way that I'm interpreting it is that what time is this? What time are these stories set at? And I mean, in some ways they are, that's a hard thing for me to answer. That I think they exist outside of time in some way, but I wonder if you have a different answer.
Yeah, I think also I wasn't thinking maybe they're just set in the time that I wrote them in my head.
Mhm.
Um, which was, 2015 to say 2022. That's when I was writing them, but none of them are futuristic. None of them are really far back in the past.
Mhm.
They could be any time. Um, yeah, they could be any time. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I'm gonna link two of these together because maybe they're related, but this one asks, how long did it take to write the entire collection? How many revisions? And then at what point did you feel like they were good enough to be sent out to an agent?
So, I mean, in the interest of transparency, I wasn't writing a collection when I was writing the story. When I was writing these stories, I was just writing stories.
Mhm.
And I did not realize it was going to be a collection. I found that out maybe like 7, 8 years later that I had a bunch of stories. And what was the second part of the question?
Oh, that when were they
It's
ready to
gone.
go to an agent? Yeah, it's
Oh,
gone, I
so
think.
yes, that's it's gone. I was like, when were they ready to go to an agent? So I actually, the first story in this, I'll tell you the truth about this. The first story that I wrote in this collection is Basic Training, and it won a Public Spaces inaugural prize writing fellowship. That was the first year they did it, and it won it. And it was one of 3 stories published in their magazine, which is a big deal. I mean, the magazine is a big deal.
Mm.
And that was big for me at the time because I hadn't been published in any major magazines, and a couple of agents reached out to me, and I lied and I told them I had a novel when I did not have a novel. And they're like, "Well, can we see it?" And I was like, "Sure, a couple of months, couple of months." Um, this is not, I would not recommend doing this. I don't know why I'm telling everyone this, but eventually, I was like, I don't have a novel. What am I doing? I was also young. I was like, what am I doing? So I wrote back and I said, I have a couple of stories. And so I sent them to a couple of agents who had reached out and they liked them. And the agent that I finally got, offered to represent me. And I said maybe we could wait for a little bit until I had a full. So that's how it came about. I don't think that's the typical way people get agents.
Mm.
But it was, that inaugural writing fellowship was in that way was life-changing for me because my
Yeah.
agent is amazing and I love her. Um, and it opened so many doors. So I would submit to writing prizes and things like that and try and publish in magazines. Those also open doors. And otherwise, once you have a collection, just query. A lot of my friends get agents through that. And I don't know, Samantha, if you have anything to add.
It was so long ago in my life. I don't know if I have any
Have you just had the same agent throughout?
throughout. Yep.
That's amazing.
I was his first client and we've been through quite a bit together.
Oh, that's
He's
amazing.
beloved to me. So we have t just time for one more question. And I'm sorry to folks whose question I didn't get to, but the last one that we have here is, what inspiration do you take from your real life relations and experiences? Do you worry about real life counterparts to your stories catching on that the story is about them?
No, I don't. I do take a lot of inspiration, but I don't worry about real life counterparts
Mhm.
or, because a lot of it is tweaked, it's changed, it's morphed. Um, yeah, I don't worry about it too much. The stories change so much by the end that it's hard to tell who they're about.
Mm. That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much. Um, Gwydion, I don't know
Thank
if
you.
you want to join us again but
I do indeed. Wow. Thank you both so much for that rich and thoughtful and candid conversation. That was terrific. We're so lucky to have you both of you as Penn Faulkner authors. You have absolutely, without a doubt, enriched the legacy of our award. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we wrap up, for those of you in the audience who are here in the DC area and who want to spend more time with Mahreen, there's going to be an event on May 30th at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. We don't have a link to share yet, but we're partnering on it with the DC Public Library. So if you check their website, you will find it soon, I promise. And finally, I want to remind everyone here that Penn Faulkner is a nonprofit organization with the mission to champion the breadth and power of fiction in America. Like all the work we talked about here tonight, and we can't complete that mission without help. Every single small contribution we get makes a real difference. Even $15 helps us buy and donate a novel to one of the thousands of students we work with in the DC school system through our education programs. And for a shocking number of those students, it is the first book that student owns. Can you imagine that? Your $15 can buy a young person the first book they've ever had. And they get to meet the author, by the way, on top of that. So I think we've got another link dropped into the chat. And I hope you will consider making sure that everybody, even those who can't afford it, has access to the kind of rich cultural literary experience we have all just had. And with that, I thank you. I thank you again, Samantha and Mahreen, and I wish you all a good night.